Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset. Today is a fun day for me because I get to talk with a gentleman who I met many years ago. His name is Skip Vaccarello, and Skip and we were just trying to remember where we met. It was at some event in San Francisco, and I am now not remembering what it was. But anyway, we met and got to know each other pretty well. Um, and we've talked over the years about faith in God and a variety of things like that. Skip wrote a book entitled Finding God in Silicon Valley. Um, we'll have to talk about that, Skip, because Ray Kurzweil keeps talking about the fact that at some point the singularity is going to hit and we're going to marry computer chips in people's brains. I'm not convinced about that. I'm not sure. But Skip, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're really glad you're here.
Well, Michael, it's such a pleasure to be with you, and I'm glad that we're able to make the acquaintance again after many years. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
And now you're not in California anymore. You're back in New Hampshire
No, well, I split my time between New Hampshire and North
and North
Carolina.
Carolina. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm in North Carolina now. I lived in Silicon Valley for 42 years, I think is what it was. But we moved. Grandchildren left, or my daughters and grandchildren left, one to the state of Washington and one to North Carolina. So we decided to go to North Carolina. So we live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina,
Mm.
and a lake in New Hampshire.
What lake?
It's called Newfound Lake. It's close to Lake Winnipesaukee. It's lesser known than some of those
Yeah.
lakes. But yeah,
I
we've had a house there for many years and love it.
I spent time in and around Lake Winnipesaukee. That was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
lakes are just beautiful, crystal clear water, and it's a real nice area.
I had a friend who had a summer home on an island out in the middle of Lake Winnipesaukee, and I remember that when we first went there, you had to go out to the home by boat, and it was so nice because at nighttime there was absolutely no sound. It was so quiet. I loved it.
Yeah, yeah. And the sky was you probably could see all the stars in the sky too, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's
What a beautiful place.
yeah. I'd love to get back there at some point. We'll have to do that and go visit it. Well, tell us a little bit about the early Skip, growing up and all that sort of stuff, if you would.
Sure. Well, I grew up in the Boston area, and people will probably detect a little bit of my Boston accent
A
still.
little bit.
So I grew up there. I grew up just outside of Boston, and
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Waltham was the town.
Okay, in Waltham.
Yeah,
Okay.
grew up in Waltham and went to school there. I went to undergraduate school at Harvard and graduate school at Boston University, and you loved the area. So that's where I grew up. We have family of there were four of us. I was the first boy and pretty involved in sports, and I was a reasonable student, but enjoyed the area. And it's nice, coming back when I have the chance, going to New Hampshire. I still enjoy the city of Boston. It's a wonderful city.
Do you ever go by and visit the Harvard Coop?
Oh yeah. I'll go by and especially if I'm at a reunion, I'll go there and pick up some paraphernalia. That's for sure.
Well, I there was another place near there that I like to go to because I collect old records, Cheapo Records, and so I went there to get a lot of vinyl records and things like that. And I'm not sure if it's still around or not. I heard somewhere it wasn't, but then somebody else said it was still around.
Interesting. Your vinyl records. I mean, they're a collector's item now.
Oh yeah. Well, I have a whole bunch here, so they're fun.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I remember collecting some as a kid, but if you have some, they're probably worth a lot of money, Michael.
I do. I even have a few I bought duplicates of, and they're still sealed, so they're probably
Wow.
worth.
Yeah, they probably are.
They're definitely
Absolutely.
worth something.
Absolutely.
Well, so you went to Harvard and all that, and then what did you do?
Well, for my career, yeah, I went to Harvard. I was there in the late 60s and early 70s, and your listeners may recall from history that was a time of real turmoil.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the war in Vietnam was going on. 1968 was sort of a pivotal year. There was the war in Vietnam. There were racial riots in the city. There was the rise of feminism. Drugs were rampant on the college campuses. So I went to school in the midst of that, and I'll have to say it really was not a fun time to be in school, although I
Mm.
made some good friends and maintained the friendship for quite a long time. But anyway, so I was there, and when I graduated, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And it was interesting because there had been a study done of my class at Harvard, and many people, didn't know what to do. Some immediately went on to medical school or law school or something. But then there were a group of us that were, just kind of wandering around and did various things. But anyway, I finally got my first job. Well, one thing I should say is that I always felt an inclination for business, but business and capitalism at that time was kind of on the outs. It was a
Bad words.
bad word, bad word. But I enjoyed business. Anyway, I took a job. My first job was in a nonprofit organization helping mentally handicapped adults. And I was doing the sort of the business activities. And so I was doing what I want and doing something that I felt was socially useful. And I ended up staying in um, that area for around 7 years. One of them was with a sort of a bigger organization. I ended up being the assistant executive director. Then I was asked to start one, and I refer to it as my very first startup. We had taken over an old school building and renovated it and began a program for the mentally handicapped people. It was a lot of fun to do that. So I did that, and then what happened is we would get contract work to help employ people, and one of the pieces of work we got was from a software company. So this was in 1978, 1979, and personal computers were just
Yeah.
coming out then. I mean, there were games and nothing much very useful. But anyway, we got a little job to package some games, and some of your listeners may not remember this, Michael. You probably do, but software then on personal computers came on audio cassettes.
Yep.
Hard to believe. You'd have to load this cassette into the computer and run it. So we had the job of kind of packaging these with the manual. And then as I got to know the founder of the company, or one of the founders of the company, he showed something that was in the works, which was a spreadsheet that eventually, became known as VisiCalc, the very first spreadsheet in the industry. And then he asked me to join him and the other co-founder, who was from the Toronto area, and we moved to Silicon Valley. And during that time, I was really ready to make a change. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I was fascinated with personal computers. So went to Silicon Valley, and it was an amazing place during the whole personal computer revolution. Small industry, traveled around the country, giving out, demonstrating what a spreadsheet could do, and people were fascinated with that. I remember one day we had this sort of nerdy kid came into the office. It was Bill Gates. We had about 5 employees, and the whole industry was really small then. So it was fun to be part of that. And then from there, it was sort of what happens in Silicon Valley and technology business. VisiCorp was a really hot commodity, and then competition came in. They made some mistakes. They bought a company that specialized in networking communications, and I went over as the CEO and president of that. We eventually spun it out as VisiCorp eventually went out of business, but this little company we had, and we were successful and grew it, and in fact sold that 3 different times, and continued to grow the company. And then I left that to have what I'd call my second startup. And this was to do computer-based training to try to teach people technical subjects on a computer. And that ended up morphing into one of the first e-learning companies. So we did that, and that was a lot of fun. Eventually sold that. I did a little bit of executive coaching and mentoring, and one of the CEOs that I was mentoring asked me to join his organization, which was called Applied Weather Technology. And I should say, I knew in most cases, I really knew very little about the domain that I was going into, but I think I had a pretty good business sense. So in this case, the company had software and services for the maritime industry. So we would help captains have the safest, most fuel efficient route to take around the world. So it was really an interesting business. So I did that. I said I'd do it for a year. We ended up doing it for 4 years, and it was exciting and fun to be part of that. And I had a chance to travel around the world. We had offices around the world, so enjoyed that experience. And then I left and to write the book that you mentioned, Finding God in Silicon Valley, and so anyway, that's what I ended up leaving that. Eventually, got involved in helped start venture capital firm, a faith-based venture capital firm called One Flourish Capital. So anyway, so that's a little bit of the background. There's a lot more I could talk about that, but that kind of gives your audience a little bit of an overview.
I hadn't thought about it for a while, but you mentioned the software back in 1979, 80, and so on, all being put on audio cassettes. I remember the original Kurzweil reading machine for the blind
Mm,
used a Data General Nova 3, so a small microcomputer. Well, it's kind of more like a mini computer, but it had a cassette recorder in the front of it. And every time you turned the reading machine on, you had to run the cassette to reload the software because there was no disk storage or anything available
right.
yet.
Right.
And
Yeah, one
so,
funny, oh, go ahead,
no,
continue.
I'm just saying. So it was kind of fun. It didn't take too long, and it really did work. I think once or twice there was some sort of a load error and you had to start it over again. But really, that didn't happen very often. It was pretty good.
Yeah, it was real interesting. I just one sort of funny story. We had, I remember we had a product that was returned to us, and we couldn't figure out what was wrong. I forget what it was. It was probably one of the games. We had the best-selling game, which was called Microchess. Anyway, decided to just put it into an audio player. So you put the cassette in, and what we heard was a sermon by I think it was a Baptist preacher, and it was labeled. I think it was labeled Microchess. So anyway, the duplicator had messed it up. And so this pastor probably got our little beeps and
Yeah.
beeps instead of his sermon. So it was kind of
I
comical.
I remember once I took one of the program cassettes and put it in my cassette recorder because I was really curious to hear what it sounded like.
Yeah.
And I had heard military teletypes and so on in the past. And when I heard this, I went, those teletypes are really slow compared to the code speed on these cassettes. But it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, it was fun for me to be involved in all the changes. The changes were so rapid in Silicon Valley. So I really appreciated my opportunity to be involved in all of that for the 40 some odd years that I was.
Well, yeah, and it certainly was rewarding. You were pretty successful at it, and it all worked really worked out well. And so you can't complain about that. What got you into the whole idea of doing more faith based things? Was that going back to childhood, or how did all that come
Yeah,
about?
I'll give you maybe a little bit of my faith story. So I grew up in a Christian home. I was raised as a Catholic, and as I said, when I went to college, though there was all sorts of turmoil, and many of us rejected all sorts of things, including
Hmm.
business and faith. So it became, and I can't say that I rejected it, but it just wasn't very meaningful to me. I didn't think about it. I didn't pray. I didn't read the Bible. But if you were to ask me, I would have called myself a Christian, but certainly wasn't practicing any of that. And then when this is maybe, so that went on for about 15 years. Then I remember we had then children, a couple of children. And I remember I was on a business trip. I was in Paris and I called home and I asked my wife, Jackie, I said, well, what did you do for the weekend? And she said, well, I went to church. I said, you did what? That wasn't even in our conversation. And I was just so surprised that that's what you did. She said, yeah. And she found it really helpful. And so anyway, when I came back, I followed her along and went to church. And I also found the messages really, really meaningful. And anyway, I started to go, and then I decided I have to figure out if this stuff is really true or not. So I spent a fair amount of time, listening to the sermons, but also looking at the evidence for Christian faith. And I became convinced that Jesus is who he says he is. And so at that point, I committed my life to him, and it became the most important thing in my life. And really, God put two things on my heart once I made that. And this was mid 80s, about 1985, 1986. Two things on my heart. One was to do the best job I could to try to live out my faith in business. And the second thing was to help people know who Jesus is. I was convinced that was the key to life. And so I enjoyed getting involved in in one-on-one conversations. And anyway, that ended up leading to starting with a group of people, what we eventually called the Silicon Valley Prayer Breakfast, and now it's called Connect Silicon Valley, feeling that, especially in Silicon Valley, people may not go to a church. They may, for a variety of reasons, not want to even consider faith. But if there were a speaking event in which there was some celebrity, especially
Mm-hmm.
celebrities from the computer industry, talking about their business, but also about their faith, that might attract people. So that was the sort of the premise with which we started the Silicon Valley Prayer Breakfast, specifically for people who were not necessarily of faith, but maybe curious about it. So we had a series of great speakers, and it grew from, I think our first event was about 150 people, and in the last event, the pandemic came, and we had about 1,000 people at the last event. So it really grew. In fact, the people it was at the Santa Clara Convention Center. They said it was the biggest event that they had at that time of the morning. You would start the event at 7:30 in the morning. So anyway, that was really helpful, and we just did that to help open up conversations about faith, and it was I think it was pretty successful doing that. So anyway, that was a little bit of my background, and maybe one thing I didn't say, but I had this sense, as I grew up, my family, we didn't have very much money, um, but as I began to achieve some success and some financial success, I realized that it seemed like there was something missing in my life, and later on, I learned, and I didn't know this at the time. Blaise Pascal called that a God-shaped vacuum or void that's in each one of us, and most people try to fill it with success or money or whatever else. But as Pascal says, and I agree, the only thing that can adequately fill that void is God. And I didn't know it, but that was ended up being true for me. I felt that there was something missing. Life wasn't all about success and finances. And anyway, I'm glad that I took that journey. I'm glad for the people that helped me along in that journey to become a follower of Jesus.
I hear you. I know for me, um, I've always had, I think, a pretty strong faith. My father and I talked a lot about God and religion and so on as I was growing up, and he read things to me. So I was pretty used to the whole concept right from the outset. And one of the things that I learned along the way, and I think it fits into what you just said, is, as you said, people try to fill that void with so many different things, and the thing we never do is we never listen.
Mm.
And the thing that frustrates me most about prayer is that people are so busy praying to God about what they want that they forget God already knows. The issue is, are we really willing, and are we ready to take the time to listen to get the answers?
That is
And
such a good point, Michael. I
that's the real
absolutely agree.
issue.
Go ahead.
No, that's
Hmm.
the issue. Go ahead.
No, I was saying I agree with you that that a lot of us, and I do this time to time. I just pray, okay, that's it. But taking the time to then listen, and then if you really are aware of it, you'll see various things along the way where God is communicating with you either through other people and things that your opportunities you're presented with, and so on. So it's that whole idea, I think, in the Bible, it talks about praying continually. And in for myself, I kind of have an ongoing, just a dialogue in my head. Well, God, what do I do in this situation? Or thank Him for something I see, or whatever. But yeah, that whole idea of just being aware and listening is a very important one. Yes, very good point. Thank you.
Well, and one of the things that we talked a lot about as I was growing up was the fact that, yes, we believe in God, we believe in Jesus, and so on, but there are other religions that really, when you analyze them, come essentially to the same place. They're peaceful, they're loving, and um, unfortunately, we have all too many people who say there's only one religion that works, and that just isn't so either. You know,
Well,
I think that there are issues, but the fact is that there are a lot of people who believe in God, and come at it from a different point of view, but still believe in God.
Well, and I agree. I think that there are a lot of there's a lot of commonality among all the world religions, and most of them all have a moral code to them. In fact, the golden rule, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you,"
Right.
is common to all religions. But at the same time, there are also some real differences, and and it's interesting where what you said and many other people say that there are many different paths to God, but typically, if you were to ask anyone in any one of those religions, they would say no. That if it's a Muslim, I think that we have the path, or a
Yeah,
Jewish
which
person,
is the
this is the
problem.
path,
Right.
and so on. And so, I would encourage people to. I mean, you may not like this idea, but I believe that really. I mean, I'm covering this in an upcoming podcast that Jesus is the way. I mean, he's the only one in any of these world religions. Most world religions, say that we have to sort of earn our way, to salvation. Am I a good enough person to earn eternal life? Whereas with Jesus, it's the other way around. He wants us. He's very inclusive, and offers his love and his forgiveness to
Sure.
everyone. And he says, in John 14:6, I am the truth, the way, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. So it's that is an exclusive statement, but it also, Christian faith is inclusive. Anyone who wants to come, it's not, is ready to come. So we probably don't want to get into that too much, but
No, I
I
don't.
think
Not too much, but by the same token, I take it in a little bit different slant. Not, I don't. I agree with what you said, but I also know that I am goes beyond what we're talking about. God in Exodus, when Moses said, "Who do I say is sending me?" He says, "I am that I am. Thou shalt say, I am has sent me to you." And I think a lot of people miss that, and they miss the fact that I am is God.
yeah,
However you want
Yahweh.
to
I think
deal
the
with it.
word is Yahweh. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's the thing, and I think that that was what Jesus was saying as well, um, because Jesus also said, "I and my Father are one," and all the works that I do, greater works you can do as well. I think what we really need to do is to recognize that, in fact, from a mindset standpoint, it's ultimately believing in God. And if you're an atheist, that's fine. Sorry if we're offending you, but that's a different story. But I do know that in reality, we all need to recognize that if we listen, if we really work at it, we can be better people than we probably think we are.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is the point of it is to be, the message of Jesus is one of love. I mean, he loves everyone, and we're called, to love everyone. And that means not just fellow Christians, but no matter what faith you're part of, or whatever, you may have done or do, or whatever,
Yeah.
we're called to love everyone. You think how different the world would be if we all really acted that way.
Gee, wouldn't that be something? Especially today, right?
Oh,
It's crazy.
absolutely. Yeah,
It is really
absolutely.
crazy. So, the prayer breakfasts and so on, kind of, I assume, ended when the pandemic began.
Well, it did for a
It,
while, but
for
it's
a while. That's
yeah.
what I
There's a
was
whole
wondering.
but there is a group that's restarted it, and by the way, we changed the name from Silicon Valley Prayer Breakfast, and a few years ago. We changed it to Connect Silicon Valley, and we did that because we really wanted to be open to people. It's not an event just
Right.
for Christians, but for anybody that was interested in attending. So it is active, and in fact, it's now had I'm only minimally involved, and they've made me chairman emeritus, but there's a new group that's running it, and they've had several different events. So it is going on. If any of your listeners are in and around Silicon Valley, it's called Connect Silicon Valley, and I'd encourage them to go. I think they have a speaker that we had earlier. It's coming up in March. I think it's Pramod Hawk. Pramod is one of the top venture capitalists in the world. He's with Norwest Ventures, and I think he's a speaker at an event that's coming up in a few weeks.
Mm. I may end up being in San Francisco, but not till May. I'll have to
Hmm.
find out when they meet and see if there's a way to get down there. It'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think faith and having beliefs is extremely important to do. And one of the things that I always quote when I am giving speeches is something Jimmy Carter once said, which is, we must adjust to changing times while holding to unwavering principles. And I think that
Hmm.
all too often we miss the principles part.
Yeah, that's right. No, I agree. Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
And it is something that we need to do. Well, I'm glad that Connect Silicon Valley is still continuing to function. That's pretty a pretty important thing to do. Well, when did your
Well, I
book?
think it is, and especially in Silicon Valley, which is a pretty secular place.
Yeah,
And I think it's a secular place because, it attracts a lot of people with type A personalities, people that are feeling very self-sufficient, and why do I need God? But it's been interesting. I really feel that there's a movement of God going on in Silicon Valley, and it has been for a while. And what kind of motivated us, our vision with Connect Silicon Valley, was that if Silicon Valley ever could be known as a place not just of technology and innovation and wealth creation, but a place of God, the world would take
yeah,
notice.
yeah,
And to me, there's lots of evidence that that's beginning to happen.
yeah. Well, I think that's true, and sometimes we're not necessarily hearing a loud voice, but the voice is still there, and um, more and more people are going to get drawn to it, I'm sure.
Well, I think so. I mean, ultimately, as we said earlier, I think each one of us has a sense of a need for something beyond ourselves, and people might call it a force or a God or whatever else. And so I think there is that need, and hopefully, I would encourage your listeners, to explore the evidence for faith, to take a risk, and people might have been turned off by religious people, and I can understand that, but take a look at it. And I would specifically say, look at what Jesus has to say, and take the time to look at the evidence because there's plenty of evidence out there for Christian faith.
I participated in a number of programs. It's a Methodist program, but it's ecumenical, called the Walk to Emmaus.
Hmm.
And have you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
It's actually called a short course in Christianity. It's not intended to convince people what they should believe, but rather it's to develop leadership within the church, whatever church. It
Yeah.
doesn't. It isn't. Although it was started by the Methodists, actually that's an outgrowth of a Catholic program called
Hmm.
Crucio, but it's the same thing. And when I was lay director of one of the walks to Emmaus, and we could talk about the history, but Walk to Emmaus is basically based on after Jesus was crucified and rose that day. There were people walking to a town called Emmaus, and he joined them, and they didn't know who he was, and they talked, and they all went to Emmaus, and they sat down and they had dinner, and it was at dinner that he revealed himself to them, and then he disappeared. But the whole idea is it's a way to bring a little bit more enlightenment to leaders. But one of the things that, as the lay director, I had to do was to give a talk on perseverance and so on.
Hmm.
And a quote that has always struck with me, and I think it goes beyond Christianity, but Tolstoy once said the biggest problem with Christianity is a lot of people don't practice it.
I think there's truth to that.
And what you said earlier, that so many people are not necessarily the best Christians, and there is so much of that. We really need to go back to basics in everything that we do.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people get turned off to faith or Christian faith because they look at some of the behavior of people who claim to be Christians. And the fact is that every one of us is flawed in some ways, in one way or another. What I like to do is look at people what was their life before they had Jesus in their life, and what's their life after that. And
Mm-hmm.
and you can often see the difference. But we all make mistakes. We're all imperfect people, and faith, the church is not for it's not for perfect people. It's for sinners, people that are imperfect, and that's really why 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 Jesus came to us. So I would, yeah, I'd encourage your listeners to try not to get turned off by some of the behavior of Christians, because some of it is certainly not good. But to really look at what Jesus says, and engage people who are believers, and I think they'd admit what's right and what's at fault, and so on.
The basic principles are the basic principles, and they hold no matter where you come from and what you do. And it's
Yeah.
important to really deal with that. Although I'm with Mark Twain. I wonder if God invented man because he was disappointed in the monkeys, but that's another story.
I hadn't heard that quote.
So you wrote the book Finding God in Silicon Valley. When did you write that?
It was published in 2015.
Okay.
And
So it's
it
been around
really,
10 years.
it's been, yeah, and it really was an outgrowth of some of the talks people gave at the Silicon Valley Prayer Breakfast. And I felt that, and really, the reason for writing it was to encourage people to consider faith, because in the book they'd read about Silicon Valley leaders who, in their faith story, how they came to faith, what they went through. Um, some stories were a little bit like mine, where they found the evidence, but others, went through personal tragedy and found faith that way. And then the stories were also about how they're trying to live out their faith day to day in whatever business they're involved with. So there are a variety of people. There are nonprofit leaders, company CEOs, venture capitalists, and so on. And I think we all like to hear stories. And that was what was attractive about the Silicon Valley Prayer Breakfast. I know that sometimes when I'm sitting in church on a Sunday morning, and I may not quite remember what the pastor said, but I usually remember the stories that he tells.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think stories are an effective way to communicate things. In fact, I'd call Jesus the greatest storyteller of all time. He told his stories often in parables,
Mm-hmm.
and those are things that we remember. So, yeah, the book was what I enjoyed is I just enjoyed sitting down with people and hearing their stories and interviewing them, and I did the best I could to compile those stories. There were 26 of them in the book, and yeah, it's available on Amazon. So I'd encourage people to pick it up and take a look, and you can go through a person or one story or that seemed to attract your attention. So it was quite a project to undertake, but I'm glad that I did it. And let me just I'll tell you the way I got the idea is I went back to a Harvard reunion. This might have been in the mid 1990s. And they had a little, sometimes at these reunions, they have little groups that get together. And there was one that I was part of a Christian cohort, even though I wasn't a Christian in college. Anyway, I was part of this group, and we were given a book called Finding God at Harvard. And, although Harvard was founded as as a Christian college, it's certainly not thought of that
Mm-hmm.
these days. And so the writer, Kelly Monroe, and her name is Kelly Monroe Kullberg, had put together stories of Harvard graduates and how they came to faith and what they were doing. So I thought it was a great book. And so that's what planted the idea in my mind. I said, well, people don't think of Harvard as a place of faith. They certainly don't think of Silicon Valley as that. So I had the idea, and this was in the mid 1990s, but as I said, it wasn't published until 2015 because I found it was really difficult for me to work full time and write the book. So after I left my last full time position is when I had the time to write the book.
Well, and I assume it's been pretty successful.
Yeah, I think so. I get some, to me, successful is if people have read it and they say, yeah, and I'm considering faith, and to me, that's the success of it. So anyway, it was really quite an experience, and happy to do it. And I'm still in the process. I'm looking at a couple of other books now of maybe following up with and writing.
Hmm. Writing is fun. As you know, I've written
Yeah,
now 3 books, and I haven't figured out what to write next. But I'm sure something is going to come along. I haven't written fiction yet, and I haven't really come up with a hot idea yet. But we'll see. It's kind of fun to think about.
sure, absolutely.
But we do what we can, and we keep moving forward, and that's what it's really about. But it is a lot of
Yeah,
fun, Meanwhile, I do get to travel and speak, and I'm working with Accessibility and helping to make internet websites more usable and inclusive. That's something that VisiCalc never did, was to make an accessible version of the product, but that's okay. That's okay. It took Excel and other products a while before they became accessible too. So not a problem. We all grow, which is what it's really about.
Yeah.
But so what is your, well, let me ask it this way. So you wrote the book, you retired and so on. What kind of projects do you have coming up other than thinking about other books?
Well, a few things, that I'm doing right now. As I mentioned, I was part of a startup venture capital company called One Flourish Capital, and I'm still a little bit involved, but not as involved as I was. They're on a second fund, and I was very involved in the first fund. So I spent a little bit of time with that. But I'm more engaged with things like love mentoring. I mentor some students and mentor some entrepreneurs, and enjoy those opportunities. And as I said, I'm putting together a series of podcasts. Not as active as you are in it, but I did a series last year, and I titled it "Who Do You Want to Become?" Encouraging people to put together a personal strategic plan. When we're involved in business, it's often the company does a strategic plan of, what's our vision, our mission, our values, our goals, and so on. And something that I've practiced for many years is putting together a personal strategic plan. So some of that podcast series is just encouraging people to consider doing that, which again give a clearer direction for where you want your life to go, or where God wants your life to go. So anyway, that was a podcast series, and right now I'm in the midst of putting together a series that I'm calling "Why Believe: Exploring the Critical Questions About Christian Faith." And so I'm going around interviewing experts on some of the tougher questions. We talked about one earlier: is Jesus the only way? Other questions, what about heaven? Another question is, how could a loving God, allow innocent people to suffer? So questions like that are often stumbling blocks for people. And I know answering questions like that was very helpful for me in my faith journey. So anyway, I'm in the process of putting that podcast series, which I expect will be ready in April. And if your listeners are interested, it's on skipvaccarello.com. So that's where you can find the first podcast series. The last name is Vaccarello. So anyway, it's there. It'll be on Spotify and Apple and YouTube. So anyway, so I'm involved in that. But I should also say that one of the important things that I do is we moved here to be close to our daughter and grandchildren. So I love spending the time, with my grandchildren. And we just traveled out to Spokane, Washington to see the other family. And that's just so enjoyable. So while I'm actively involved in doing things like that, I love spending time with the grandchildren, and I try to stay physically active, still play some tennis and golf and pickleball, and so it's and anyway, I'm involved in a lot of different things and enjoy them.
It's interesting. You were talking about the issue of how could a loving God let anyone suffer. My reaction to that question, and I've heard it a lot, my reaction to that has always been, how could God not? It's really an issue of, have we listened to God? And what did we miss along the way that would have prevented us from suffering? But God gave us free will and free choice.
That's exactly right.
And so
that is the crux of the issue. We have free choice, and some of those choices aren't good ones that we make. And God doesn't force anything on any of us. And that was
right.
probably one of the things He gave us, was that we're free to choose, and we can choose bad or we can choose good.
Yeah. And the question is, it's always the question, do we learn from mistakes that we made? And, I have rejected the concept of failure. I think that failure is such a horrible thing to say. I think that there are things that don't work out, but did we fail? That means we can't ever deal with it or do anything about it. Or can we take the time to analyze what didn't work right? And even when we did something and it worked out, could we do it better? That's one of the basic cruxes of Live Like a Guide Dog, my latest book, which is all about teaching people how to control fear. And the whole idea is that we don't take nearly enough time at the end of the day or at some point in the day to do more introspection and self-analysis to understand why whatever happens to us and what could we have done to make it have a better outcome or even or did we come up with the best outcome possible?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. What did we learn from it? I mean, you would see that time and time again, some of the most successful people had many failures along the way. And hopefully you're going to learn from that failure, and you're going to try something else. You're going to fail, and you try something else, and I think that's just what goes on in life. It's a
Well, and that's why I say that it isn't really a failure. It is a mistake, perhaps.
right.
We didn't
Yeah,
intend for it to be a mistake, but if it was a mistake and we acknowledge that, why and what do we do about it? And I think that's one of the important things that so many of us could do a better job of thinking about was why did this happen? What was I afraid of, or what could I have done differently? And the fact is that if we open our minds to those questions, we'll get the answers,
hmm Yep. I agree.
which is, I think, really important.
Well, I was
Um,
listening to, I don't remember I wish I could remember it, but I was watching something on television the other night, and there was a quote that kind of stuck with me. And the quote went something like this: it was an encouragement I think it was a mother to a son. He said, don't think of what life has done to you. Think of what life has done for you.
mhm.
It's what we're talking about is you might have run into some difficulty, okay, but maybe that's an opportunity to learn from it and to go on and to do something else. And I think life is like that.
Well, people talk to me a lot about the World Trade Center and don't you
Yeah,
have guilt of surviving while other people didn't?
right,
And I tell people, no, I don't have any guilt about that because the fact is I did survive. Why others did not is really in part possibly an issue of what choices they made. But the bottom line is it isn't whether I feel guilty or not about surviving because I had no control over the World Trade Center happening. What I
right.
do have control over, though, is how I deal with it and how I move forward. And that's the choice
Point.
that I get to make,
Yeah, very good point. Hmm.
which I think is really important. And someone asked me that just the other day, and this is the response that I gave: is the reality is, it's we have no control over a lot of things that may happen to us, but we do have total control over how we deal with it, no matter what it is.
Yeah, and you think of it, I'm sure the lives that you've changed, writing about that and talking about that with your speaking appearances, and it was such a tragedy that, the thousands of, what was it, 1,700 or 1,800, I don't remember the number of people that died in that, and all
Yeah,
the family,
3,200. Yeah,
3,200 was, all the people that were affected by it. On the other hand, I mean, stories like yours came out of that, and you've been an encouragement to many, many other people. So that, you've, taken advantage of that opportunity and you've affected the lives of many.
yeah. Tell me more about what you're doing today with mentoring students and so on. How do you do that, or how do they find you? How does that all work?
Well, one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, that there's a whole bunch of things that have gone on in Silicon Valley where I really feel that God is at work. And there was a guy that I got to know that I actually mentored him a little bit. And he founded an organization called Scholars of Finance. And it started and it's not a quote, a Christian base, but it's sort of an ethics based organization. And his idea was to go to college campuses and encourage people who were in finance, accounting, finance of some sort or another, to look at the ethical side of business. So he put together this thing called Scholars of Finance, and they were started on maybe a couple of universities in the Bay Area. I think they're now on maybe 70 campuses around the U.S. And I've had the opportunity to speak at a number of those campuses some in person, most of them virtually. And the idea is that they have people like me that come and speak and try to, we tell stories, encourage people about maybe the ethical issues that we ran across and how you can kind of navigate some of those issues. And part of that whole program is if you want to put yourself up to mentoring, you can have the opportunity to mentor some students. So I have, and I've had the opportunity, and I have the opportunity to mentor some students, and I really love it. And what are the differences I find? I think that, sometimes there are negative things that people say about college students these days, but one of the things that I find encouraging is that they're really open to mentoring, to getting advice from an older generation. I remember when I was in school, what was the mantra that you don't trust anyone over 30. They don't know what they're talking about. But I find students these days are really looking for that advice and guidance, and so I enjoy when I have those opportunities to speak to people. And I would say also that a lot of these students are incredibly motivated and driven. And it's interesting to see. I think it was even different than when I was in college. But anyway, that's kind of a fun thing to do. And then I also have entrepreneurs, people that either find me or that may be a company that we've invested in, that have an opportunity to help those entrepreneurs with their business plans. And one of the areas I like to focus on is helping them develop the right culture. I think to have a successful business, is you need a culture, a positive culture that's encouraging to people. So, I do that. I try to encourage them to start out and build the right culture, in your organization. Doesn't mean the business will succeed, but that's one of the things I like to help entrepreneurs consider as they're building a business. So it's not just about the product. Certainly, you need a product and you need to market that product, and often you need technology to make it a success. But ultimately, it's the people in that organization and how you deal with them and how you deal with your customers and how you deal with your vendors and so on that can help make or break a business. So anyway, those are the mentoring opportunities that I have, and as I say, and do enjoy them.
What are some of the typical questions that students ask that you find to be sort of common among a lot of students?
Well, they'll sometimes ask me about ethical situations that I've come across. Often they'll ask, since I've been involved in the venture capital business, is what does a venture capitalist look like? How can I get funded? And that's sort of an ongoing topic of conversation, and it's in that environment. It certainly changes a lot over time. But that's a common side of it. Occasionally there'll be discussions on technology, and I'm not, even though I've been involved in Silicon Valley for a long time, not a technologist, and they're usually typically very far advanced in that side of things. But get questions on what's a go-to-market strategy? How do I, if I have this product, what do I do with it? And often, I'll get presented a business plan. What do you think about this? And, where can I make changes? And sometimes, often they're very well done, but sometimes there might be some blind spots, things that they don't see. And interestingly enough, and this is not, something that I push for, but some of the students then they pick me up because they've seen my bio. And I've had a number of students who weren't brought up with any faith background that asked me about faith and what was my story and what should I do to consider faith. So I find that very interesting, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that they may have. So that's enjoyable when those opportunities come.
Yeah, it's kind of cool to be able to enter into those discussions and just talk a little bit about faith and what what they're looking for and what you're looking for and so on, and getting a chance to, in a non-confrontive way, help people understand the value of faith, whatever that may end up being for
Sure.
them. I think is important to do.
Yeah. And often, I end up, well, I I'll offer things if they ask, but I usually, what I like to do is just ask lots of questions to them. And I think it's very helpful, where are they coming from? What have they considered? What have their experiences been? Especially if it's in the faith environment. And I think it really helps open up conversations when you end up not just being there as the as the advisor that knows everything, because certainly I don't.
Mm.
But it's very helpful, I think, as a method, as a mentor, is to ask lots of questions.
I love to have question time when I speak because I find every so often I'll get a new question.
Hmm.
It doesn't happen as often as it used to, but every so often something new comes along and or people ask questions in a different way. And what I really love about it is it helps me learn because it
Yeah,
makes me think. And I
absolutely.
think that's as important as anything else. And as I tell people when I'm talking about speaking or doing these podcasts, if I'm not learning at least as much as anyone else on the podcast or when
Hmm.
I'm speaking, I'm not doing my job right.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I think I learn more. Occasionally I'm asked to give a sermon at a church or speak at a public place, and I think that I learn when you're. I think I learn more than anything else when I'm
Yeah.
when I have to prepare for these opportunities.
Isn't it fun?
Oh, it is. It certainly is.
Well, so you've been retired for a while. What kind of advice would you give to somebody who may be thinking about retiring?
Good question. And it's funny. I sometimes people ask me that question, and I think that, well, I'm retired from making money, but I'm still pretty busy doing things. And that would be my encouragement to people is to, don't just think you're going to go sit on a beach or whatever else. I mean, I think that can get boring pretty quickly. But, and if I would say continue to do what you're doing if you love it, but consider what maybe your spouse has to say, your children or grandchildren have to say, and make sure you spend time with them. But my encouragement would be is to keep busy, find activities. If it's in your case or my case, it's been doing some writing or podcasts or whatever it is that you're passionate about. Just you have an opportunity now to do it, but also to take time for relationships. And one thing I didn't mention that is one thing I encourage students to think about. It's really it's a question of life. Because life is about relationships, and you want to. Hopefully, along the way, people haven't sacrificed relationships. So you see that sometimes in business where they sacrifice, their family or other relationships for success in business. But when you're retired, it's a time to deepen those relationships, to really spend some time, with other people. And as I say, to do things that you love. The other thing I'd say is to keep moving. I had a chance to visit my mom about a few weeks ago. She's in at Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and she's 103, 103 and a half.
Mm.
And people ask her what's her key to longevity, and she says just keep moving.
Yeah.
And although she's not physically as active, she tries to get up and keep moving. And she's also one that's and always keeps alert. She volunteered. She hasn't doesn't have the capacity to do that now, but up till about 99, 98, she had volunteer activities going on. So, stay engaged, keep moving, keep doing things. And anyway, that's my encouragement. Don't just think that it's going to be, time at the beach or certainly not time in front of the television. Keep moving if you can and keep mentally stimulated.
That's the real key is mental stimulation. I think is extremely important. Just I think retirement is is overrated in terms of what it really or what people think it is, and I think mental stimulation is an important thing. And when you stop working at a job full time because it's time to not do that anymore, you should have more time to be able to develop the relationships, stimulate your brain, keep your brain thinking, and maybe go off and look at doing things in a different direction. That always is a great challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's a
I
it's a it's a it's a very it's a neat time of life now. I mean, I enjoyed the time that I had while I was working, but when you retire, you have a little bit more freedom
Yeah.
that you had before. So, but use it wisely. It's really true with anything. We all are given, resources of various sorts, and time is one of the most valuable resources that we have. And we're invest it wisely because life is short, and as you get older, realize how short life is. So invest that time wisely and invest in relationships, as I say, is probably the most important thing.
Yeah. I think that's extremely crucial and makes a lot of sense. And you'll meet people and find things that you never knew before, and you continue to learn, which is what it's all
Yes.
about.
Yep. Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you for spending an hour with us today and doing this. We'll have to do it again, and I think it'll be a lot of fun. But I really enjoy you being here and appreciate you taking the time
Well, Michael, thank you so much. I've enjoyed it. It's fun for us
to
to
catch up.
reacquaint.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a great conversation, and hopefully, listeners will get some benefit from it. But I've enjoyed the time that I've spent with you today. Again, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I hope all of you have enjoyed listening and watching us, and that you'll give us a 5-star rating wherever you're watching or hearing the podcast. We really appreciate 5-star ratings a lot, and just your thoughts. So if you have any thoughts about today's episode, please email me. I'm easy to reach. It's Michael H.I. Michaelhi at accessibe.com. And if you want to subscribe to the podcast, do it wherever you're listening, or you can always go to Michael Hingson, michaelhingson.com/podcast. And I hope you'll do that. But also, Skip, for you and all people out there who are encountering our episode today, if you know of someone, including yourself, who might want to be or you think ought to be a guest on Unstoppable Mindset, I'd love you to reach out to me. We're always looking for more people to have on and talk about various things. And like I said, for me, in part, I get to learn when we do that. So we really appreciate you finding other guests for us. So don't ever hesitate to reach out and let us know of people we ought to interact with. But again, Skip, I just want to thank you for being here. This has been a lot of fun, and we really appreciate your time.
Well, Michael, thank you again. Enjoy the rest of the day. Appreciate it.